Hello, my name is Sheena with Rise Wellness, and this is Activate Your Genius. Thank you for joining me as we explore Gene Key 32 from Richard Rudd's book, The Gene Keys. This is the shadow of failure, this is the gift of preservation, and this is the Siddhi, or the highest destiny path of veneration. So the 32nd shadow, this is the shadow of failure, and it's one of the greatest fears in all of our species, the shadow of failure. So this is actually built right into our DNA. Our individual fear of failure is actually rooted in our collective fear of failure to survive as a species. So way back in our olden days, we had this notion or idea that if we lived collectively, if we all gathered in our families and these tribes and operated in packs, that we had the ability to survive. We would all assign these responsibilities to everybody. Everybody had these roles within this organization, and when pulled together, enormously improved the chances of our survival. So in prehistoric times, if someone then became ostracized or isolated for some reason, chances are they would not survive. So at the core of our desire to stay together is actually the foundation of another one of our greatest fears, and that's our fear of not passing on our genetic material. So in other words, it's our fear of our family or our tribe essentially dying out. So for a woman, this will manifest as the fear of not being able to give birth or find a mate to breed with. And for a man, this is actually the fear of infertility. So in our modern world, we no longer have these strong tribal family structures, and most young adults will actually leave their families seeking these opportunities. So now we have swapped out our tribalism for this fear around money. So the way this works is we're on this quest seeking these resources because we believe that the more money we have, the greater our chance of survival. So what we actually come to find out is this is the same old fear. And instead of having these fears that our genetic blueprint will die out, now we have this innate competition with one another. It's survival of the fittest. It's who has the most resources that can provide the most for their mate to grow this family. So money has essentially become this great symbol for success in our modern world, and we believe that we have a less likely chance of failure the more money that we have. At least that's what our shadow self believes, and it's really our 32nd collective shadow that has created this modern world that we live in right now. So truthfully, this whole money thing, it's an illusion, it's a sham. So no matter how much money we come into, we still have this huge issue with it. And it's because our fear always needs something to feed on. So even if we eradicated money from our civilization, our fear would go ahead and find some other place to hide. Just like Franklin Roosevelt so famously said, the only thing to fear is fear itself. So as our ancestors had discovered, failure really means only one thing, and it's to be isolated. The moment you cut yourself off from your support system, you really are cutting yourself off from support of any kind. You cut the link with your family, with your support system, and you lose touch with the very chain that keeps you alive. So more and more research is actually coming out to call loneliness a silent killer. And some experts will actually say that isolating yourself is the equivalent to your immune system of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness has become the silent killer. And I read an article last week that was saying it's more deadly than heart disease, than automobile accidents, or like a whole plethora of things. Loneliness literally is the #1 silent killer in our modern world today, which is so insane to think about, because we have the most populated world that we've ever had at any time in our existence, and yet we're the most disconnected and we're the most isolated from one another. So if you want to alleviate your risk of dying young, don't isolate yourself. It's as simple as that. Be involved in your community. Surround yourself with a few like-minded people who value you and love you. It doesn't have to be millions of people, but make sure you have some people in your corner, because especially here we are in, I don't even know how long, this is halfway through 2022 and we're still experiencing COVID. And so what we have come to find out is, it's the fear that's the real disease here. It's the real element. It's the real virus, is the fear. It's the loneliness. It's the isolation. I know some people will argue that, but at least that's what I believe is. It is the fear that compromises our immune system. It's the isolation that is really leading us to get sick. There's a lot of research that will say that, viruses are not contagious, but what's super contagious is fear. So in our modern world, we have people that are living these very isolated lives. And these days you can have a lot of money and you can have enough resources to flourish without actually needing anybody in your little bubble. But this shadow isn't just about people, it's about life itself. So we as a whole live very isolated from Earth. We still think in terms of our families, our individual selves, but many of us haven't raised the group consciousness enough to think in terms of our species, which is why we have not transformed this 30-second shadow in our group consciousness to overcome this mythical fear of failure. So it's our minds that feed and react off of fear. So if we're not in charge of our mind, it's this fear that's going to run our entire lives. We may not be able to completely eradicate this fear in our gift state, but we can choose not to react to it in the way that maybe we have before, in a way that's been destructive to our well-being. So we can loosen our grip on this fear. This fear has already done the job for us. Look at how many people are populating our planet. We have survived as a species up until now, and we've done a really good job of procreating. So, this higher state of consciousness takes out that individual desire to reproduce, and it elevates our consciousness to think about our species as a whole. So there's a direct link in this to the theme, to the shadow of death, or our fear of death and our fear of money. So until we can think beyond our own lives and out into the whole, we're going to remain isolated in our own little lives, in our own little world, with our own little bank accounts. So failure then, really, when we look at the context of this gene, is the outcome of isolation. When you raise your consciousness above this dualistic thinking of success versus failure, you can always trust that life is evolving according to its own cosmic pattern. It always has been, it always will be. When you come into this state, you recognize that money always arrives on time. It's just when you stop attaching to it and having that need for it so much that it always shows up when you need it. And it actually makes a perfect lesson money these days has become one of the greatest spiritual teachers that we have. And we deserve and we should be utilizing it to our advantage, because we won't always have it. So we won't always utilize it as this symbol that we have now of our ability to surrender and trust in these higher consciousness and allow the higher consciousness to work through us. So Richard Rudd will say in this passage, he will say, every time you feel yourself worrying about money, smile, take a breath, thank your ancestors for everything they've done for us, and relax. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When you need it, it'll arrive, and it'll always be on time. So in a repressive nature, these are the fundamentalists or the extremists. So this repressive nature is an extreme form of conservatism. This fearful nature is extremely tight. It actually starves themselves of breath and support from others. So these people isolate themselves in these really small communities. They don't interface with the rest of the world. And more often than not, they start to grow these paranoias around the rest of the world. And it's usually only a matter of time before they all die out together. This is what we see in cults, in these like really small communities. In a reactive nature, these people are considered to be disjointed. So these people always, the reactive nature is always built up with this anger. So the shadow frequency is always about fear, and it's about anger when it's in the reactive side. So these people have an anger that there's nothing to support them but themselves. So they think that they have to take on everything. If they don't have the resources to support themselves, they will simply not survive. And they have an anger against that because they're always working against the flow. They usually end up in a really self-destructive life pattern that escalates at an alarming rate. They've lost the touch with the flow of life, and literally everything goes really rocky for them. They're out of the flow, nothing goes smoothly, they're so cut off from their source. They don't have any trust in anything higher than themselves. They don't have any, they've lost their connection with nature and the universe as a whole. They put themselves at the top, thinking that they have to do everything for themselves. So they really have no real rhythm or purpose. And their decisions put them into grave danger because they don't have the ability to put themselves as one with nature, as a part of the whole. So every decision that we make in our lives is either going to connect us to something deeper and greater than us, or it's going to cut us off from that. And when we cut ourselves off, we're actually cutting ourselves off from this divine inheritance that we are intended to receive. And in doing so, we feel more isolated and alone than ever. So when we raise our consciousness up, we then come to the 32nd gift. This is the gift of preservation. This gift is all about keeping things alive. And what is so special about this gift, like all of the gifts, is it thinks beyond the self. People manifesting this gift have an instinctive knowing for who and what to invest their time and their money and their resources on, and what not to give into. They move beyond their fear-based thinking. They know what's worth keeping alive. They know what's worth investing, and they have a deep capacity for restraint. They're not easily talked into spending their money or their resources frivolously. They have an innate knowing for which investments are worthwhile. And when we think of investments, we use that term really broadly. And one of the things that I love so much in the teachings of this gene Richard Rudd talks about a parable, and I'm not going to say the whole parable, but in it, in ancient civilizations, they used to call the currency of money talents. Now think about how wonderful if instead of calling our currency a dollar, $100, a coin, whatever, we called it talent. Imagine if we started investing in the talents that we all had, how that could change our relationship to our resources and the ones that we have, the ones that we're able to share. Just think that's pretty fun. So these people that are manifesting this gift of preservation, they invest their time and money wisely. They look in the long term. And it doesn't even always appear to be that logical, because they have a gut feeling on who to trust and invest in. They make decisions from their heart and their intuition based on their logical mind and reasoning. So the secret of this preservation gift really is knowing what to keep alive and knowing what to change. So really, they know how to maintain this success in life because their principles aren't fixed. They are always expanding. They overcome this fear of failure, and they know that preservation isn't just about the self. It's not just about self-preservation. It's about the preservation of all of life. So only that which adapts will survive and will flourish. These people fall into the flow of life and they understand the rhythms. When something is dying, they know whether it needs to be pruned or disposed of. So the programming partner of this gene, this is the gift of detachment. So together, these genes instinctively understand how to let go of things that no longer serve them. And they maximize their energy by investing in what is strong. So this detachment also means that they let go of their notion around what failure even is. So it's usually out of our failure, or out of our fear of failure, that prevents humans from adapting. So if we were to take a closer look at nature, we would see preservation everywhere. So as we become more successful as a species, we realize that success at the gift level is all about economy. And that means being and living in harmony with everything. So we're not in competition with anything. We're moving in a balanced harmony with all of it. So as a species, our two biggest fears is our fear of failure and it's our fear of death. So if we can listen to the wisdom of our ancestors while also incorporating the modern technology that we have been blessed with, we experience a real true transcendence. And this is the secret to the gift of this gift is grafting the two. It's binding the two things together to strengthen what has worked for us and also adapt in our modern world so that we're constantly expanding. So people with this gift have a really great balance when it comes to being conservative with certain things and kind of haphazard with other things, because they're in the flow, they trust, they've eradicated this fear. And so this gift here is so balanced. It knows what to hold on to and what to let go of, and it just does so in the same way that we see it in nature. If we can't transcend our personal fear of failure and our selfishness, that is when our humanity goes to becomes at risk. So the highest destiny path of this gene is the 32nd Siddhi of Veneration. at a certain point, and we talk about it with all of our siddhis, we will evolve past our ego brain, our primal instinct, our fears. And once we move beyond our fears, all of our anger will also be transcended. When we dedicate the life of ourselves to the service of others, that's when we create this buildup in our frequency within the subtle bodies that eventually burns off all of our karma that has been accumulated in our ancestral DNA. Service is the expression of love, and there is no limit to the bounty of love that we are here to give. So this highest destiny path is all about committing your life to a life of service. Asking yourself, what does the world need more of, and how can I give that back? What I love so much about the Gene Keys is it's such a loose guide into accessing your gifts and using them in any which way that you personally feel called to. At the end of the day, what can you pour more love into? What is your passion project? What are you devoted to? What gives you rapture? How can you better humanity towards accessing your personal divine gift and sharing it? All of us have a passion project, and it is all giving back in the service of others in some way that we feel called to. It's so creative, it's so beautiful, and this gene, just like all the others, is about accessing that, tapping into it, and being of service for our humanity. So when this supernova occurs within you, your identity and even your gifts are crushed, because this new field of service emerges through you. And this is what all the Siddhic states are. Veneration is the state that occurs when you see and know your place within the living chain of life. You experience wonder in the interconnectedness of life. There's no ounce of separateness left, so there's nothing to incarnate anymore. The notion of evolution has come to an end, so you get to experience this immortality. You have no fear of death, because there is no such thing as death. There is no such thing as mortality. So those who have attained the Siddhi of veneration have always incarnated in some form of spiritual lineage. So consciousness in form always has to move through the limitation of a lineage. So one thing that I found interesting in my contemplation this week is I've always had this strong connection with Mother Mary, and I've been working with her a lot this past couple of years, and this year I've had a strong connection to Kali coming through for me. And it was literally just this week that I came to discover that they are the same exact lineage manifested through these different forms. So all the while I have been working with Mother Mary, I've also been working with Kelly, only her form has come to me this year in these different ways, and I thought they were almost opposite energies to one another. I mean, no, but yes, but I don't know, it's just interesting. So here's the thing, is that, you know, you might have this lineage get incarnated through some different ways. Like you might have a Buddha that is incarnating through the Christ consciousness. So this Buddha incarnating through this has no access or history of knowing the stories of Jesus, but it's still incarnated because it's part of the same fractal of this lineage. So that's really what this Siddhi reminds us, is that we incarnate through these fractals. So when I say that we no longer reincarnate, we no longer reincarnate our physical form, but our consciousness still incarnates in these different fractal lineages because we're all fractals connected to the same source. So one thing that's super interesting about these great cities is that this one in particular is found in the symbol of water, which is what both our body and our planet is mostly comprised of. So therefore, our awakening that we're going through is all coming through our water cycle. This is our tears, this is our urine, this is our sweat. This evolving chain of consciousness is present, and it's occurring in every single life form on the planet through the medium of water in our food chain. So the key to our evolution then is in our digestion. As you contemplate this city more and more, the more reverence that you inevitably feel for all life. You start to really see the connectedness, the interconnectedness with all of life. So this week I had the pleasure of being interviewed for this vegan summit and had a beautiful conversation with this vegan, and we were just talking about the way that plant-based living has changed our lives. And for me, it's given me a deeper connection to all living things. It's how I'm able to elevate my frequency, my consciousness, to see how closely linked I am with nature and all living things. So I used to be able to offer some kind of logical reasoning in my brain on why I had to eat chicken. I had given up all other meat, but I was holding on to chicken for a really long time. And until I finally went through these genes, experienced the highest destiny paths of them, I had to peel back this reasoning that says that I am one with all things, but I can still eat them. It just didn't make any sense anymore. And that I know, like, I will look at plants. They're still a living thing. So how am I able to consume that living thing, but not this living thing? But, you know, it looks, for me, it goes back to the sentience of the life of the animal. And I can justify the plant much more than I can justify eating the animal at this point. But another reason that I bring this back is because when I watch my friend launch this vegan blog and raise this awareness about living a plant-based diet, I see her achieving her Siddhic state in her service to others, to raise more awareness about how you can get all your nutrients from plants, how you can have a deeper sense of compassion when you make your food choices 3 times a day. There is a mindfulness practice that we have around food when you wish to have it, when you wish to incorporate that into your life. So there is for me, there was just a difference in my life when I started becoming more mindful of what I put in my body and my connectedness with all living things. So just something that's really interesting to consider. So this week, as you are activating your genius, I want you to think about your relationship with money, and also your relationship with what failure is. What does failure look like to you? And is your relationship between money and failure closely connected to one another? When I said earlier that money is a sham, what was the first thought that you had going around in your mind? Is it a sham to you? Is money an illusion to you? We live in a society where we can't pay our bills with good wishes. We have to pay with money. It's a real, literal context in our life. So if you think about your relationship to money, Is there an attachment that you have with it? Is there a sense of security that you have when you have attained a certain bank balance? Can you just peel back some of the emotions that come up when you think about money and failure, or even money and success? How do they play an integral role in your life? Another thing that we talked about in this gift is integrating the old with the new. In our old ancestral ways, they knew that the way to achieve evolution and to survive as a species was to stay connected with one another. And here we are, the most disconnected we've ever been, and yet we can go onto social media at any given moment and we can get validated by people with likes and new followers. But while this is happening, you have young people experiencing the highest rate of suicide, because just like in these old tribes, if they became ostracized, if they were isolated from their community, they were the most at risk of death. And this is now what's happening with our children. Our middle schoolers are committing suicide because they're bullied on social media. It's devastating how we have this modern technology that gives us this ability to connect with one another and share our talents with one another. And many of us are choosing to live a life that's more isolated and disconnected than ever. So really heavy topics this week. So I invite you to be really gentle and compassionate with yourself as you just kind of let some of this information sink in and sit with the feelings that come up. You know, is there an old habit that you have that has kind of fallen off the wayside and you want to breathe some new life into it? Think about how you can look back at, maybe it was at the beginning of the month you had some resolutions or goals that you were manifesting, or maybe it was the beginning of the year. If you go back to that list now, are you doing them? If something's fallen by the wayside, is there a way that you can breathe new life into it? I always find it's helpful to attach your new goals to existing habits. So for example, if you want to drink more water, you've decided that you wanted to drink a gallon of water a day, and you started off really great about that, but it's falling off. Can maybe you say, well, when I take my vitamins in the morning, instead of taking a sip of water, why don't I drink 12 fluid ounces? So you know you've gotten to the habit of taking your vitamins every morning, but how can you better aid yourself in getting in that gallon of water through these small, simple changes? If you know you're going to go to the gym 3 times a week and you usually drink 48 ounces of water that hour that you spend at the gym, can you challenge yourself to drink double that? So again, it's taking an old habit that you've already perfected, that you're already doing on a daily basis, and taking one of your goals and seeing how you can sync them up. This is grafting the old with the new. The other thing that I would invite you to think about is your relationship to isolation. Here we are, like I said, 2.5 years into a worldwide pandemic called COVID. And in the news, there's a lot of propaganda around isolating. There's a lot of noise around people are dangerous because they're contagious and therefore we have to stay away from them. I know that some of these concepts that I can bring up can be triggering to some people because maybe my views are not the same as yours, but I just invite you to think about the real fear that's going along with this virus, and it's the fear that is the virus, because the fear is isolating people. It's taking them out of their communities. It's making them afraid of one another. And that is literally biologically, physiological, what breaks down your immune system. It's the loneliness. It's the isolation. It's the disconnection. And it doesn't have to be. If you have found yourself isolating and being so afraid to engage with the society and community and groups that you used to, I beg you to please leave your house, re-engage. And if that starts with doing a group that you used to do in person on Zoom, at least it means that you are resuming that idea of community. Isolation will kill you, and I don't want that for you. So re-engage with your community, however and whatever that looks like. And also think about how you can be of service to others. You know, if you have this manufactured belief system that you are only worth as much money as you have in the bank, do yourself a favor and do some volunteer work. There is nothing more gratifying than feeding the homeless. There is nothing more gratifying than using the skills of your own body and mind to do something that provides a service to someone else. Maybe it's packing at the food bank, maybe it's handing out meals at the shelter. Whatever it is, I invite you this week to give back in some way that feels really good to you. And maybe it's just a text message to someone that you've felt a little disconnected from recently, and it's saying, you know what, I love you, and let's make a plan to get together soon because I miss you. It's as simple as that. You know, the very last thing I'll say is if you do have a fear around money, there are so many money affirmations and mantras out there that you can adopt that I'm not even going to list them because I want you to find the one that aligns best with you. And one of the things that I've learned, one of my takeaways from the teachings of Abraham Hicks, has been like these silly little tricks that I still do all the time. And one is keeping all of your bills, your dollar bills, $5, $100 bill, whatever, face up. And aligning that vision of face up bill means money coming. So every time I have my bills face up and I see it, the rewiring in my brain that I have created says money always comes to me. It's something so little, but it works magic. Another thing I would suggest is to always keep a large bill in your wallet. I like to keep a $100 bill tucked away in the back of my wallet, so at any given moment, if I feel any kind of phobia coming up around how much money I have or any kind of lack, scarcity mindset creeping in, I can drive by a restaurant and say, I could treat myself to a nice meal. I could buy that outfit for myself at a store. I could buy a lovely gift for someone because I have that $100 bill in my wallet tucked away. And the key on that is don't spend it. Keep it there. Be utilizing this gift of preservation. Know when to spend and when to hold on to that. And I guarantee you, you're going to change your relationship with money if you always keep a large bill on you that you never spend, and you keep reminding yourself over and over again that it's there for the taking, and look at how many wonderful, amazing things you can do with it. That's all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate and value you so much. The light in me sees and honors the light in you. Namaste.